without further ado, I think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Today's date is October 28th, 2020, and this is a meeting of the City Council's Public Safety Standing Committee. I see that we have committee members, Councilmember Sandberg, myself, Councilmember Scambaluri, and Councilmember Piedmont Smith present. And we will start this meeting this evening. We have one item on our agenda, and it is Ordinance 20-20. And the title of this ordinance is to amend Title II, Administration and Personnel of the Bloomington Municipal Code to establish a Community Advisory on Public Safety Commission. The synopsis for that ordinance is as follows. This ordinance is authored by Council members Piedmont Smith, Rosenbarger, and Flaherty, and amends Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code, Administration and Personnel to create an 11-member Community Advisory on Public Safety Commission. This commission would, among other duties, research and make recommendations to the Common Council and the mayor on matters of public safety. Okay, Council Member Piedmont Smith, will you be presenting this evening?
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to go ahead and share my screen. I think Councilmember Matt Flaherty, one of the co-sponsors, and Councilmember Kate Rosenbarger are joining us as well as co-sponsors of this ordinance. If you don't mind, I'd like to try to share my screen and go through a presentation of Ordinance 2020.
Go right ahead, thank you.
All right, can everybody see that?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we would like to present our proposal for Community Advisory on Public Safety Commission. First of all, the context that we see as City Council members is that in order to adequately represent the people of Bloomington, we need to hear from various demographic groups. And there are some demographic groups that don't have a seat at the table, especially when making decisions on public safety, even though issues of public safety affect them greatly due to various forms of bigotry, prejudice, and systemic bias. And so this is really a mechanism for us to hear those voices. We propose the formation of the Community Advisory on Public Safety Commission, CAPS, to hear these voices, specifically their recommendations for improving public safety in our community. So then the context as far as public safety, of course, this has been a topic that has been very important in our nation as a whole and has come to the forefront since the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And we have heard from many constituents that members of our community do not feel safe. They've told us this in emails, conversations, petitions, and public meetings. In the meantime, the Bloomington Police Department is increasingly asked to address problems outside of law enforcement and is overworked, as we discussed during the budget process. Nationally, there is an increasing recognition that law enforcement is being asked to deal with social problems and that this is not working. Finally, we want to emphasize that public safety is much broader than policing, and policing is only one aspect of making sure our community members are safe. So what is public safety? Well, it can mean different things to different people, depending on your demographic characteristics and your personal experience. The commitment of local government should be to protect the whole population especially the most vulnerable among us, as residents have emphasized to us this summer. Therefore, we propose to set up a new structure for city government to hear more directly from marginalized populations about their public safety perceptions and needs. So I'd like to run through the goals in the creation of the CAPS Commission through Ordinance 2020. First of all and foremost, we would like to hear from folks who have been left out of the discussion about what is public safety for you and your loved ones. How can we improve public safety with the tools that we currently have? And what new tools or services could we add to make our community more safe? And this would be done by commission members reaching out to their own communities. Continuing with our goals, we would like the commission to review programs that have been used successfully in other communities and see if they could be applied here. To do this, we may have volunteers that could help with research and outreach at the direction of the commission. The commission members themselves will lead, and the commission will go in the direction that they think is best. But in reviewing other programs, when some ideas rise to the top, CAPS would then reach out to the relevant city departments and or other agencies to explore if those ideas would be feasible to implement in some way in Bloomington. A third goal is to discuss new local ideas or adaptations of programs that could improve public safety. So not just looking at what's been done elsewhere, but also bringing forth new ideas that may be particular to Bloomington. Goal number 4 is to report to the City Council and to the Mayor's administration in time to possibly incorporate new or expanded tools for public safety into the budget request for fiscal year 2022. So many of us, or the 3 sponsors of the legislation, had concerns about public safety and about how it relates to the budget for 2021. And so we'd really like to get this feedback from the CAPS Commission in time to make changes for 2022 as may be appropriate. And then finally, a final goal of the CAPS Commission would be ongoing evaluation of public safety in the city, with annual reports to the City Council and the Mayor's administration, and then also monitoring and evaluating actions taken based on the CAPS Commission recommendations. So follow-up is an important part of this as well. All right, so how would the appointments to the CAPS Commission be made? As is written in the legislation, the commission is to be comprised of 11 members. The appointment process will go through the city clerk's office, just like all of our other commissions in the city of Bloomington, either online through the onboard system or via paper application forms. And I did talk with Clerk Bolden about this, and she's willing to accept paper forms. And then council members and council staff can work with social service agencies to make the paper forms available and to collect the completed forms and return them to the clerk's office. So we realize there'll be an extra need for outreach and connecting people with those applications because some of the population that we are aiming to include may not have access to the online application system. From that point, the city's Public Safety Committee, this committee, would review the applications, conduct interviews, and make recommendations to the City Council. And then with any other appointments to boards and commissions, as with any other appointments, the City Council votes. They usually do follow the recommendation of the committee. So with the appointments, we would very much like to give preference to and strong encouragement to people to apply who are often marginalized by society. For example, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ+ and non-cisgender or non-binary individuals, people who have experienced or are currently experiencing homelessness, domestic violence, mental health problems, be they addiction or something else, or some combination. People with disabilities, and people who were previously incarcerated. And of course, there's intersectionality between these groups as well. And as we may not find individuals who are willing and or able to serve from these underrepresented groups, we would also reach out to people who advocate on their behalf and welcome them to apply. So the duties of the commission, as they appear in the ordinance, would be to gather data about perceptions and preferences regarding public safety, specifically from racial minority, economically disadvantaged, and marginalized residents of Bloomington. Then research evidence-based approaches to public safety, focusing on those approaches outside the scope of traditional policing. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, policing is just one part of public safety. So the ordinance encourages or asks the commission to focus on a more broad sense of public safety and how to bring it about. The third point in duties here is explore best practices in socially and racially just public safety measures in other cities and examine which of those ideas may best be implemented in Bloomington. And then make recommendations on the basis of their research and data gathering and provide an annual report. And finally, there is an educational component. I think that our community as a whole could benefit from hearing the perspectives of people on this commission and the demographic groups they represent to promote a broader view of public safety throughout the community. So as I mentioned earlier, the timeline is rather quick here in the first year because we would very much like to have a report from the CAPS Commission that we can consider when crafting the budget for the year 2022. As far as staff support for the commission, it would be supported from the City Council office. And like I mentioned earlier, there may be community volunteers who could be invited to help with the data gathering, the research, that kind of thing. But in all cases, they would be just volunteers and taking their direction from members of the commission. So I'd like to address some other efforts related to public safety that have been pursued in our community or are planned. Of course, we have the Board of Public Safety. This oversees the police and fire departments by Indiana code. Now, this is very different from CAPS because CAPS is much broader than policing, as I mentioned earlier. Recommendations that come out of CAPS might go to the Board of Public Safety. They might go to, just the mayor's office, city government. It might have to do with budget. It might have to do with policies. But it has a much broader scope than the Board of Public Safety. And the CAPS Commission certainly would not have the ability to oversee the police department in the way that the Board of Public Safety does. Then, as was announced last week, the mayor and his administration is launching a task force on the future of policing, which is part of the city's recently announced plan to address racial equity. And that task force will focus on police reforms and not on a more broad view of public safety. And it is, of course, particularly focused on issues of racial equity. So we think it's a very valuable task force and we welcome it, but we do think that it is quite different from what the CAPS Commission would be. Then another great development that has happened recently is the opening of the Stride Center here in Bloomington. The Stride Center is a public-private partnership. It provides a place for police to bring individuals who are struggling with mental health and addiction issues as they come to the attention of police. So as there's a nuisance call or a criminal call or some other call to the police, So currently, people only are admitted to the Stride Center through interaction with police. Furthermore, it is not an entity that will come up with new recommendations on public safety from the people most affected. So it's a great development, but again, it will not bring the benefits in our view that the CAPS Commission would bring. So we have many roads and many initiatives in the works that will hopefully lead us to fulfill a common goal that we all hold, I believe, which is that we want a community that is safe for everyone. So I'm going to unshare the screen, and we can go back to, well, let me, if I may, Chairman Sims, ask my co-sponsors, council members Flaherty and Rosenbarger, if they would like to add anything.
Oh, I agree with that. I was going to do the same thing. Whichever would like to go first, if you have anything to add.
Sure, I'm happy to. I think Councilmember Piedmont Smith did a good job providing an overview of the context, and I'll just briefly agree or summarize that. Obviously, we've all been engaging with these topics a lot, not just over time, but certainly in the last 4, 5, 6 months, as the salience of these issues in our community have really risen. And when we approach the budget cycle this year and we're talking about changes or possible policy reforms and different approaches, a lot of what we heard and talked about was that, we need time, we need to seriously study the questions at hand and look at them. And I think the goal of this commission is to be responsive to the hundreds and hundreds of conversations, email exchanges, public comments, feedback that we've all taken in the last months. So in particular, there's been a lot of input from the community, folks of many, many different backgrounds, including conversations I've had about the need for looking at non-police alternatives, and looking at root causes of crime and poverty, and looking at other aspects of public safety that are sort of outside the purview of our existing mechanisms for study and recommendations within the city government. And so it's really being responsive to that, including the petition that was read into the record at the end of the budget hearings that was signed by 152 community members, asking for a variety of things, but among those things was a commission. This commission was actually named because community members had pitched the idea of something like this, but specifically called out the need for a commission like this to study public safety more broadly, including non-police alternatives. So again, the goal here was to be responsive to the wide array of feedback we've heard from community members in recent months, to actually set up a mechanism by which we can study and research and report on and consider recommendations from the community on various aspects of public safety. So that's where this is coming from, and happy to answer questions and hear feedback as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Hi, thanks very much. For some reason, my notes just shut down, so I can't see them. I wanted to reiterate, I think my fellow council members have said mostly everything, but I wanted to reiterate that we see this as a starting point of gathering data and having a public conversation, right, about what this community needs. I mean, I think we got together on this because it is clear that we don't get opportunities to hear from everyone, and we have a lot of work to do to make that possible, to create a space that people feel comfortable sharing and coming together to really inform us as members of council what they need in this community to feel safe. We all have our own experiences and our own ideas about what that might be, like personal experiences, right? But I think we are just missing out on voices. And so as council members, the best mechanism we have is to create a commission and hope that we can gather information, be it, personal experiences, data, what other communities are doing to really inform us moving forward about what we want Bloomington to be like, how we can make it feel more, not just safer, but more inclusive, right? Like everyone here is involved, can be engaged, and can really feel like a part of this community. So I would say those were just some of the vision behind me being involved, and looking forward to having a discussion tonight. And I guess I'll also just say, again, I think this is a starting point, and everything is changeable, right? And we want to hear feedback and get even more ideas about what works, what doesn't. And so hopefully that's what we'll get to tonight in the public comment section. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to committee members for any questions to the sponsors of this ordinance 2020. Councilmember Sandberg.
Is there anybody here from the city of Bloomington whose responsibility it is from an executive function to manage the police department? And I know that it's been said that this is just one piece of the whole public safety conversation, but is there anyone from the city who wants to speak to what's been presented to us? I know there have been the references to the Board of Public Safety, to the task force that Beverly Calendar Anderson so professionally is heading up, and then also the mention of the Stride Center. So I'm just wondering if there's anyone specifically from the city who could maybe speak to any concerns they may have about a duplication of efforts or an actual clash with some of the goals that we already have ahead of us. Again, I do see Beverly Calendar Anderson is here in the room. I don't know if there's anyone else who might want to speak on behalf of the Board of Public Safety.
I don't see anyone. No one from administration was invited due to our sponsors being present. So I don't see anyone. And I'm not so sure what capacity Ms. Beverly Calendar Anderson is, if it's any official capacity. I see that, and I guess, are you looking for someone to speak on behalf of one of those entities? I see Ms. Maquiba Reese is here, who's a member of the Board of Public Safety.
I do see Beverly's hand is up now. I just want a little bit of perspective as to how they are feeling about having yet another layer of people doing data research or doing recommendations when there are, definitely opportunities for public engagement through these various vehicles. So if they could just give their impressions, that's all I'm asking for.
Thank you. Before we go there, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I did have a conversation with the mayor about this, and that one of the residents that worked on the proposal did have a conversation with Chief Dekoff. And I can't speak for them, but the mayor, it was really just a short conversation to give him a heads up about it, since we're not asking his staff to take time to staff the commission. With Chief Dekoff, I know that one of the residents talked to him, and I think he was open to having more input about public safety, but I can't really say in more detail. So just to let you know that we did reach out to the administration, and we had 2 meetings with Beverly Calendar Anderson, and the second one did have 2 members of the Divided Community Project team as well. So we did have a discussion with them, and they may interpret it differently. We came out of the meeting thinking that this was still a valuable tool for the city because it was not replicating something that was already in the works. Of course, I'm sure you'll hear from them during the public comment period.
Yes, and I think, and I'll check with Mr. Lucas. I know we didn't ask Ms. Beverly Counter to be here this evening, and she's not a sponsor of this ordinance. Is it proper to? She's got her hand up. Is it proper to let her speak or say something based on what Councilmember Sandberg said?
Yes, both Beverly Calendar Anderson, I think, had indicated she may have a comment, and McQueba Reese is also here, and I didn't realize she was not able to unmute herself, and she may have wanted to comment as well, but I do see Beverly Calendar Anderson has her hand up, so she should be able to unmute herself.
And again, before we go a little further, Councilmember Sandberg, I know Beverly or Ms. Calendar Anderson may speak or be able to speak from an administrative or department head standpoint or with the divided communities. And I'm wondering, is it proper to allow Board of Public Safety member Reese to speak as well, or do we wait for comment as well for her?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
If it helps the committee's deliberations, I think that's fine.
Okay.
And while we're waiting to unmute those two, who I do want to hear from, I am a member of the Stride Coalition, and they just recently sent over their report from their very early operations, and they do have self-referrals. The initial referrals are often made by a variety of individuals, IUPD, IU Health, the Sheriff's Department, and BPD does the lion's share of those referrals. But once the individuals are in the Stride Center and once they feel comfortable and at ease and safe with the staff there, they do return on their own. They do not require having a police presence or any kind of mental health referral. So again, this is a relatively new addition to our public safety offerings here in the community, but it's one that I can attest to from attending the Stride Coalition meetings, is really making some inroads into some of the identified communities that we have heard about from this report this evening.
Okay, thank you. And before we get into council or more council questions, is Ms. Beverly Calendar Anderson ready?
I am here, if you can hear me. I'm assuming you can?
Yes.
Okay. So I wasn't prepared to speak this evening. I just sort of came to this to listen and not to speak, but because Councilmember Sandberg asked the question. I will say that we are always interested, whether it's the future of policing, whatever commission we're working on, we're always interested in hearing more voices. And for that reason, one of the goals of CAPS to bring in, more marginalized voices that have been traditionally marginalized, I think is a really good goal. I mean, so the more voices we can hear, the better in making decisions. We are working on the future of policing. We are looking specifically at policing, but of course that looks at all different types of methodologies of where policing is going. And so I would just say that it's also going to include some non-traditional methods of law enforcement. I mean, and so as you know, with BPD, we have our social workers, and the Stride Center is out there, and there are other models around the country that people will be looking at. And so we're not going to be limited to taking a police force and massaging it and shifting it around. We're looking at being very innovative and very creative in how we respond to community needs. And so it's not, I would just say that to say that we're only going to look at police reform may just be a little bit less than what we've talked about as a group. Of course, the task force isn't formed yet. We are working on it. We're recruiting right now. We've got several community members that have shown an interest. The only caution or anxiety that I would really want to put out there, just because I wasn't prepared to address this it is not confusing the community. The community is looking at the city as the city. They sometimes, whether city council, whether city administration, sometimes if it's even the county, they don't know the difference. They just want things to be fixed and to be better. And so I think adding more layers of commissions and committees and task forces and boards has the potential to be confusing to community members about not only what they're signing up for, but also what authority they have and who they're accountable to. And so that is one, like I said, one anxiety that I have about having too many different entities. But Councilmember Piedmont Smith is right. We have met. We've met. She and I met, and then some members of the Divided Communities Project met with her and some other community members that worked on this commission. And I think at the end of the day, I think the information that they would gather would be very useful. I hope that we're not gathering the same information and work, just duplicating efforts. That would be really a disservice to the volunteers working on these two committees. But yeah, I just wanted to add that. And Councilmember Sandberg, I don't know if you have anything specific to ask me, but that's how I feel about that.
Thank you. And yes, I do, because I let me pose a question for you. Would a group like this, rather than be a commission, which again is a procedure and requires a little bit of discipline and a little bit of organization here, would a group like this, and I absolutely agree that having voices that are not heard from have an opportunity to be a piece of this, would it be better to have it formed as a focus group that could then advise all of these different task forces and the Board of Public Safety and the STRIDE Coalition with respect to voices seldom heard? If that is the point of all this, would this be a more successful mechanism as a very well-orchestrated focus group that contains a large cross-section of people that don't ordinarily have the opportunity to be a part of a board or a commission?
I think the focus group concept is a good one. If you remember some things we did with the downtown, oh gosh, now I can't remember the name of it, but the downtown initiative that we worked on 2 or 3 years ago, where we started with several different groups where we talked to government workers and people who were experiencing homelessness and social workers, and then boiled it down. It was a multi-month process, but I thought very, very effective. It actually went into a task force, but it was very effective for getting the information we wanted from many of the voices that we had. We talked to clergy, and we talked to everybody involved. And so where that wasn't necessarily considered a focus group, there were multiple groups over the course of the months, and that was something that was put together by CJAM for us. And I thought that was I thought that was like an excellent process to have a commission. Of course, it's the group that's putting it together. That's their goal, to have these ongoing conversations. And I think, not to speak for Councilmember Piedmont Smith, but I think that's one of the reasons for wanting a commission, is to have that conversation continue. We have 6 commissions in our department, and so I know how much work a commission can be. But I think that, for the start, getting it through some kind of focus group process, getting some of the information that you'd like to gather could lead to maybe a more targeted commission or task force or something in the end, once you start getting that information. And it may not end up being as broad, as unique as you're envisioning it now. But that's, certainly up to the organizers how they want to do that.
Thank you. And one last question for Ms. Callender Anderson. Your task
May
force
I respond to the question that was posed about the legislation in the focus group?
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Um, as one of the co-sponsors, I would, of course, prefer that it be an independent commission and not a focus group. And the reason is that I feel a commission is really a seat at the table, and a focus group is just somebody's opinion that you can listen to or not, and that you could take or leave. Whereas a commission is really, we're empowering you, people that we want to hear from, that we haven't heard from, that are very directly affected by public safety decisions. We want you to come up with some suggestions yourselves, rather than, you know, we're going to have some conversations and then decide whether we like what you said or not and incorporate it. So I think really to empower the people most affected by public safety decisions, it needs to be a commission.
Thank
And
you.
then, Mr. Chair, if I could just follow up with Beverly.
Yes.
Your task force is also going to be much broader than just a citywide effort, if I understand correctly. It will also involve the county and Indiana University. Is that correct? There'll be representatives, so that we'll be talking about public safety from a much broader perspective than just the city of Bloomington and BPD, which kind of is the seat of some controversy.
Yeah, it's correct that we have invited the county and IUP, the Indiana University Police Department or Indiana University, to have appointments to this task force so that we can look at law enforcement and policing as a whole, because we have just found in our conversations with people that so many times people don't understand that there are so many different agencies that impact or that have jurisdiction in Bloomington. And so trying to get as many of those agencies as possible to the table so that we're all, you know, understanding things in the same way or speaking with the same voice, or understanding where we don't speak with the same voice and being able to communicate that, we feel is very important. And so we have extended that invitation out to those agencies.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to mention, if I'm not mistaken, I do believe the county law enforcement was left out of that invitation for the task force on future policing. I can be corrected if I was wrong on that.
No, the county was invited. Yes, the county was invited.
Yeah, but I didn't hear them mentioned, so I just thought I'd
I'm sorry.
Share that. Is Ms. McQueeba Reese, member of the Board of Public Safety, unmuted?
I am. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Councilmember Sandberg, I do believe, has talked about or asked about a perspective, and you being on the Board of Public Safety, I think it's proper to say from that perspective. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I was definitely ready to speak on behalf of myself, but I don't mind also because I know where I sit as far as it relates to Board of Public Safety.
Well, if I may, McQueeba, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but there will be still public comment. So if there's other information you'd like to share from a different perspective, I think it would be proper there as well.
Okay.
That makes sense, but Board of Public, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm comfortable speaking now.
Okay, go ahead, please.
All right. Yeah. I want to just thank you for this opportunity to speak and just to kind of share my perspectives. The first thing I wanted to share is, of course, we all on the board, we have our own different perspectives, and our lived experiences what kind of equated us to be on that board. And so it's really important for us to get information from various communities so that we can hear what's going on and know what's going on and have those conversations. I wanted to say something as it relates to what Councilwoman Pima Smith mentioned. I hear her say that she wants to empower the people as it relates to including people at the table. However, in this CAPS commission, those individuals, Black, Indigenous, people of color, in their intersections, were not part of the conversation in creating this piece, this CAPS piece. And that's my number one concern, because not only do we, Black, Indigenous, people of color in their intersections, want a seat at the table, but we also want to create that table, and we want other people to join our table. And that's what I would suggest as what the additional initiatives are supporting, is us actually creating that table and encouraging people to join that seat at the table. And something that I share with all the sponsors, including the organizers, was my concern about not having people of color, Black, Indigenous, in their intersections as part of this conversation, and that it is considered white-centered.
Hey, Ms. Reese?
Yes.
Okay, I think that would be, I'm going to ask that be directed to public comment on the formation of the caps. And I think Councilmember Sandberg, you have anything specific related to Board of Public Safety?
Yes, my question had to do more with your role on the Board of Public Safety, and if you could speak to your efforts and what you do accomplish with respect to your own outreach as you are weighing and evaluating what is happening in the city of Bloomington within all of the safety officers that we hire.
Yeah, sure. So the work that I do on the Board of Public Safety is to hear conversations as it relates. So getting feedback from the community, specifically in the Black community, as it relates to Bloomington Police Department, and also the firefighters. And so I do a lot of having conversations with various communities, such as on the IU's campus, and then also in our local community. Did that answer your question specifically?
Yes, and then if you have any further opinion about the addition of a brand new commission, would that be a help to the Board of Public Safety to hear their data collection and their research? And
you know, I'm an advocate for knowing what's going on, what's out there. So I think that having additional lived experiences is definitely important to hear what's going on. I think that it is important to have additional input.
Thank you.
Sure. I'll wait to public to, I guess, share my additional comments.
Thank you. Do we have any more council comments to the sponsors of Ordinance 2020? And while we're preparing to do that, I will remind the public that when it comes time to public comment, that please either utilize the raise hand function in the chat function on Zoom. In the Zoom function, or send us a note on chat to our administrator and we'll get to you. Okay, Councilmember Scambolari. You're muted.
Gosh darn it, sorry. I just noticed Ms. Callender Anderson had her hand up. Was there a comment she needed to finish, or I don't want to jump ahead? Or is that just a hand still up?
I think it's still up, I think.
Okay.
No, it's just still up. I'm sorry, I'm on a different device and don't really know how to work it.
Yeah. Right there with you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the sponsors of this ordinance. You've clearly put a ton of thought into this, and I appreciate this. And the need to incorporate a variety of voices in what we do is a very stubborn and persistent challenge. And I wholeheartedly agree that we need to do that. I'm curious about several things. Did you see examples of this kind of group in other cities? We've talked about cahoots programs and other things in other cities. Did you see a group like this in any other cities? And how did that inform how this was constructed? And I'm not sure who to direct that to.
I personally have not seen this in other cities, but I don't know if my colleagues have.
Councilmember Flaherty, yeah, unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks.
You guys are sponsors. I'm sorry not to cut you off, but you guys are co-sponsors, I guess. So I think you're all eligible to answer questions directed to the sponsors.
Thank you, Chair Sims. Yes and no. I think in Indiana, because the Board of Public Safety is a creation of state statute that is consists of appointments solely from the mayor's office. There are other communities that have been and are looking at sort of council-based alternatives in the policing context. Specifically, South Bend has been working on a additional layer of oversight and sort of public input on policing matters specifically. So that's where the no comes in. So yes, and that councils elsewhere in Indiana have felt the need to sort of have their own input from community by creating structures or mechanisms to hear from the community that are more formal, I guess, than just public comments at a meeting. But that is not about public safety. It is about policing. Whereas I think, as Councilmember Piedmont-Smith has emphasized here, I think, we're looking at, with this proposal, a much broader scope, and that has come more so directly from the community in Bloomington, and what, we've been hearing from multiple conversations with many community members, emails, public comments, again, petitions from the community that have asked for this or something like this. So that's kind of where the scope, I think, is coming from, or a little more is based on Bloomington feedback.
Okay. Even if we haven't talked to them yet, are we aware of any other cities that have a model just like this? I'm not sure if we may not, and that's okay. I'm just asking.
No, I don't know specifically like this exact model, I guess, or like what that would mean exactly. I'm sure that other communities have various task forces and commissions and entities looking at broader conceptions of public safety. I mean, I've definitely read a lot about that from other cities and what they're doing. I think this is emergent for a lot of places right now too. The conversation has changed in some ways. So thanks.
Okay. And I realize the broadness of this question, but I'm just honestly interested in your take on this. If it's 12 months or 24 months or 36 months from now, and this group has been a success, the creation of this group has been a success, how would we know? What would that look like in your mind?
Go ahead, Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Well, I think that more people would feel safe in Bloomington, especially vulnerable populations. So I think that's a reason to make this a long-term commission rather than just a task force, because we do want to get that feedback. And currently we have the community survey that goes out every 2 years, but it doesn't really get to a lot of people that have been marginalized, that have experienced homelessness or do experience homelessness, that have, dealt with addiction issues, things like that. I think our community survey largely doesn't reach those people. So one important part of the job of this commission would be to do that outreach, and, to do initially when they first get together, and then to do it again in 1 or 2 years. And if they get the feedback they get is that people are feeling less anxious and more safe, I think then we will have done a good job.
I'll kind of weigh in on that. I think it might be useful actually to pull up the slide that is the CAP's recommended initiatives, because I think that would also be some ideas of how we're going to measure success, or like what does success look like if we want to just, maybe we don't want to look at that again, but
are you talking about the alternative to 911? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's the reporting on implementation of CAPS. So it was in the slides, let me see, not necessarily about a non-emergency number like Kahoot. I mean, that's one idea, but I would have to, my slides are buried under here. I'll pause on it, but yeah.
Well, can I put a finer point on that question while you're looking?
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in the educational experience of this, because I think we can measure and document viewpoints brought forward. But I'm wondering, I think one of the most critical opportunities we have in Bloomington going forward is educational in nature. And I'm wondering how you would measure the success, our success in that realm with this group.
I think that the commission is one that we would like them to develop their own kind of methodologies. And we do, have an educational component in the legislation, so that would be one of their duties. But how they enact that would be up to them. If they have a public forum, if they have a meet and greet, if they have a video series, here I'm going to tell my story on YouTube, whatever. And so I think it's really hard to say how we can judge whether it'll be effective because we don't know what form it will take yet. I mean, ultimately, I think creating a greater understanding among residents of Bloomington for each other, like, I mean, I'm a white middle-class person with a home. I don't really understand what some people go through and what their lives are like. And so I think it would be, I would very much welcome, more conversations to educate myself, to create greater understanding so that when we allocate public dollars, so it's not like, oh, I want this and I want this and we're butting heads. It's more like, okay, I can understand why you want that. And that may be more important than what I want because I already have all these advantages, that kind of thing. So it's all a little hazy, Sue. I'm sorry to not be more specific, but.
No, that's fine. It's a complex issue, and I think that's reflected. Can I keep going or no? Do you need someone
actually, we'll keep switching here. Just keep that thought. I think I'll just go next. I guess what I'm hearing, and I don't know who this should go to, either of you three. I've heard the term broader scope a couple of times as related to the CAPS Commission. Can someone please explain what that means, the broader areas of public safety other than policing? Did I have that right? A broader scope? Okay, can someone explain what that actually means or trying to convey?
I'm happy to, if other council members, it doesn't matter. And we probably all have our own thoughts and views on this to some extent based on the feedback we've heard from residents and the research we've done. I think there's multiple things that come to mind for me. First of all, again, many residents have asked that we seriously study and look at the question of non-police alternatives. And my reading of the, I'll mention the Future of Policing Task Force and the conversations we've had about that, and my reading of the draft document and its specific 4 goals is that specifically non-police alternatives that look at how else to deal with societal problems that police more recently have been tasked with dealing with is outside the scope of that commission and therefore part of a broader scope of public safety and something we should be studying and looking at. So for instance, non-police crisis response teams. I'm not saying that's the right solution for Bloomington or not. I'm saying it's a question that I think we should study because that's what a lot of our residents have told us we should look into. That's one aspect, but I think there's a lot of things that make people feel not safe or not secure. And that might go to other aspects of insecurity, whether it has to do with housing or addiction or domestic violence, and how to address those. We've heard, for instance, from Deborah Morrow, the director of Middleway House, about how many or most of their clients do not feel comfortable calling police. So that's another area where we need to be looking. This is a public safety issue, domestic violence, and we need to be looking at how are needs not met by our current system, and how could they be met by alternatives that are outside the scope of policing. So those are just a few examples of when I say broader scope. That's what I mean by things that are outside of policing that need to be seriously studied and looked at, because we've been informed by our residents in many cases of gaps that exist. So that's just some, but I'm sure there are many more. I don't know if other council members, co-sponsors of the legislation, would like to weigh in.
I'll weigh in on it. Thanks.
Councilmember Rosenberger.
Oh, thanks. I also think of it even broader, I would say, in terms of public safety. I mean, just the basic needs of humans that can help you feel safe and secure, right? So health, public health, food security, shelter, access to help when you're overdosing because it's a crime to possess a syringe, right? So just looking at everything that folks need and don't have, and that we, they would weigh in on that to feel safe. So I think it is just really broad, and policing is one very small part of it when it comes to the big question of what do people need to feel safe and how can we provide those services.
Okay, thank you. I'll have another question along those lines in a second. But one thing I also want to know, if I may, one more time, it was just stated that we don't know what form CAPS will take. And I'll ask this question. In order to measure it and evaluate it, wouldn't it be prudent to do that as, for an example, a task force or a focus group so that it could be measured and could be evaluated? And then at some point, as it's evaluated and groomed, and it is worked into more what its goals are, so that we, quote unquote, actually now know what form it could be. Doesn't that seem more prudent than necessarily becoming a commission this so soon in the process? Councilmember Smith, Piedmont Smith.
Well, I think I did already speak a little bit about why I don't think it should be a focus group. And when I said we weren't sure what the commission would come up with, that was in the context of its educational mission. I don't know what form that educational outreach will take, but in the legislation itself, it has 6 duties of the commission. So I think it is clearly laid out what they should do. And so I think it can be clearly evaluated whether they do that. The details of, they shall have public educational outreach, and the details of how effective that is, that remains to be seen. But that's, point A, gather data about public safety. Point B, research evidence-based approaches. Point C, explore best practices. Point D, make recommendations. Point E is the educational, and then point F is the reporting. So to me, it seems like there is a clear set of responsibilities of the commission. And in order to have, to be able to get feedback as to whether their recommendations when implemented are effective, I think we do need a longer term body than what a task force or a focus group would be. But I'm happy to have my colleagues follow up on that as well.
Well, I was going to say thank you. Part of what I was getting at was tagging on to Councilmember Scamboluri from how do you measure success question that was asked. Further council questions? Councilmember Sandberg? No. Okay, Councilmember Scamboluri, I'm sorry. Hang on a second. Go ahead, Councilmember Rosenberger.
Okay, I could just weigh in a little bit on that as well. It is just a reiteration, but I think it is important to say again that a reason to have this as a commission specifically is that it really is, I think, a time to have these individuals in a leadership role and in a decision-making role instead of the subject of a study that tends to happen again and again. And so that there isn't a barrier between, the research they're doing and the experiences they're talking about and us hearing that firsthand. I think that's really important, that it doesn't have to go through a different body to get to us. Also, I think it is worth noting that a commission, I think, is the right mechanism, because this is an issue that isn't going away, and it's going to continue to be molded, right, by just the problems of our times. And it's better to have this in place, and so that we can get ahead of the game instead of be reactionary. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes, thank you. Two questions. First of all, if the ordinance talked about gathering data about perceptions and preferences regarding public safety and so forth and so on. I understand what perceptions are. I want to make sure I understand correctly what preferences are. So what would data about preferences look like, for example? I just hadn't seen that word.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good
context.
question. Like Councilmember Rosenbarger said at the beginning, you know, we're open to revisions to make it more clear. And I see that that is kind of an unclear way of stating, I think, what we're getting at. I think that the preferences is more about, you know, how do you feel comfortable? You know, if I have, if somebody is walking through my yard and making me uncomfortable, I wouldn't necessarily call the police because that might just make the situation worse. And yet I don't want somebody walking through my yard and looking into the window. So I don't know. It's you know, it's like there's more than one way to get the job done. And one way may be more comfortable, less liable to inflame a situation than another way. But I think Councilmember Flaherty, you might be able to illuminate this better than I can.
I'm not sure if I can, but I've had similar thoughts. I'm trying to think of, you know, some of the community conversations I've had, and for instance, Councilmember Piedmont Smith and I met with the Homeless Coalition, which I think you may have as well, Councilmember Scambolari, some weeks ago, and spoke with a few folks who are currently experiencing homelessness in our town about their interactions with downtown resource officers and how they feel about the DROs and their function kind of within their community. And I think things like that are also folks who have, for instance, worked with the police social worker. I think those are the types of things that are preference-based, where like different people based on lived experience and demographics and other things are going to feel more or less comfortable with different types of avenues to achieve public safety outcomes. And I think gathering information on that type of thing is what I see as preferences. Like not all perceptions isn't broad enough necessarily. Like preferences has to do with like how people feel safe, and if there's multiple ways of achieving an outcome, what is the way that certain groups or individuals prefer. So that's kind of where my head is at on that.
Okay.
I would weigh in a little bit too, just that, like, I think Councilmember Flaherty was getting at what I was going to say, that it's more of a feeling, I think, that you can't know unless you ask people. And so it is like some people, you know, some people prefer more police presence, some people prefer less. It's even like, I mean, something very simple, right? Like some people prefer bananas, some people prefer apples, and it's just like something we don't know. And so we talk to them about it. So it's just like a very simple preference, but like, I don't know. I was just thinking about fruits, and like, it's not something you can really study. It's something you have to just like reach out and have those conversations.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Rosenberger. I didn't see your hand, or I would have recognized you. I'm sorry. Further questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What I'm thinking back to something Ms. Callender Anderson said that struck me. And while I know that as City Council, we only have the only thing within our portfolio is the Bloomington Police Department. I also know that the different law enforcement agencies, the sheriff and so forth, and IUPD are intertwined and interconnected, and they depend on each other sometimes. Do you see any option in this model for taking that into consideration and somehow looking at that, because I'm not right now, but maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. I mean, the notion of actually taking a broader view of all law enforcement is particularly interesting to me. But I was wondering if you have thoughts on that.
I think there is room for that. If the commission, for example, looks into a 311 phone number or, an alternate crisis response phone line, we're going to have to talk to dispatch about that. We're going to have to talk to the county about that. That would involve all county law enforcement. So certainly ideas that may bubble to the surface if the CAPS commission is formed will impact the county and other law enforcement agencies. So at that point, then we would have to, arrange collaboration between those bodies and see if those recommendations that are necessarily cross-jurisdictional could be implemented. So I think that certainly it's possible.
Okay.
And just because we're not, making, 2 spaces for county residents doesn't mean that we don't want to work with the county government or other law enforcement in the future.
And I don't take it that way. I guess what I'm wondering is there a way to engage more broadly than just BPD before we get to that point, before we actually come up with an idea that requires us to talk to the county? Is there a way can you think of a way to do that? And I mean, I can't right now, but I haven't thought about this as deeply as you have. So,
well, again, this commission proposal is to look at public safety very broadly. So it's not going to specifically engage with BPD unless there are recommendations from the commission that say, we would feel much more comfortable if BPD handled this situation this way. And then we would talk to the Board of Public Safety, we'd talk to Chief Decoff, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, those collaborations could result, but I'm not sure how we would, since we don't know the recommendations that are going to come out of it, I don't know how we would preemptively build that collaboration in. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. So I'm good for now. I've taken up a lot of time. So.
Okay. And Councilmember Sandberg, if you have any, just stick your hand up and I'll try to get you there.
We haven't heard from Ron this evening. I don't know if he's with us or I was kind of waiting to see if Ron had any questions.
I'd have to check with Mr. Lucas. I'm sure he's more than welcome, but not being a sponsor or on this committee, I'm not so sure. What do you think, Mr. Lucas? If he chose to say something.
Yeah, I'm not on the committee, but I can.
No, I'm just trying to make sure we're doing it correctly, parliamentarian wise.
I know at least Ron and Councilmember Volan are both in attendance, and I think you've got the right instinct that discussion should be limited to those on the committee and the sponsors. I did want to note Maquiba Reese is, I made her a co-host because she was chiming in and answering questions, and I think she's got a comment or maybe had something to add. I don't know if the chair would like to recognize her.
What specifically did she want to address? Do you know?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, no, ignore that. I'm sorry. She's sending me messages.
Okay, I'm just trying to be as inclusive as possible, but as proper as possible. Okay. One of the kind of the concerns, or I wouldn't say a concern, but one of the things that I'm thinking about moving forward was we talked about the broadness of the potential broad scope of the CAPS Commission. But we've also heard, or at least I've heard, from some of the staff members on the STRIDE Coalition or participants of the STRIDE Coalition. I've heard from the administrators, some of them of Centerstone, and they have all indicated to me how happy they are with BPD's interactions and how they value that service. And then when we met before, one of the things that I asked from an being more inclusive standpoint is to maybe include some Bloomington law enforcement, not necessarily police officers, but I also consider social workers and DROs to be part of that if they were more comfortable. But I was told that the folks on the CAPS Commission would not be comfortable at all with any law enforcement present. So that won't be included. And I think I understand the goals of the CAP Commission, but I'm wondering how there will be change if the actual boots on the ground folks aren't somehow involved. Or will the council, if this is made a commission, be the go-between? How do you view that? Yes, this is to the sponsor, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I think that as I began my presentation this evening, we as city council members want to hear the voices that we don't usually hear. And I think that having a member of law enforcement, even if it's the police social worker, on the CAPS Commission would possibly intimidate and dampen the voices of other people in the community who don't have power. And so I think that would defeat the purpose of the CAPS Commission, because we want to hear from those people. I'd like to just also, since Ms. Reese brought this up, and I think, you know, she used an analogy which is very apt in that Black, Indigenous people of color don't just want a seat at the table, they want a role in creating the table. And I can say personally that if I were to do this over again, I would involve Black, Indigenous people of color much earlier in the process. And that is an error in how we developed this proposal. And I apologize for that. I still think the proposal has value, and it is creating a venue for those voices to be heard. So that's why I'm still pursuing it, but as Ms. Rosenbarger said, we're open to revising it to be as inclusive as possible. But as to your question, Councilmember Sims, I just feel like we're not going to hear the whole truth and the whole range of opinion that we need to hear if we include law enforcement on the commission. After they come up with some ideas and they want to figure out how to implement them, then of course they can, you know, invite law enforcement and have discussions, and we can facilitate that as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yeah, I think that's kind of speaking to my level of discomfort with this, in that I would feel much better if it was going to start as a task force or a focus group and then perhaps merge into a commission at some later time, because I keep hearing the phrase that there are certain individuals in our community that just don't feel safe. I would like somebody to articulate a little bit more for me about what that means. And if it means that you don't feel safe around Bloomington police, whether it's the DROs, the social worker teams, the police themselves, I don't see any way around or through this issue, this community issue, until we get all sides at the table. Because the police have stories to tell as well about their interactions with people and what they're tasked to do with respect to the law and law enforcement and engaging with difficult situations that often are violence. I will say the violence in our community recently is getting to be very, very startling. This past week has been very, very bloody with guns and knives and homicides. And so the police have stories to tell as well, as do individuals who may have had unpleasant interactions with the police and are fearful. Understood. But my thinking is, my vision for the future in getting past these divisions and these fears and these, I don't want to, you know, I can't speak freely in front of a police officer, is to at some point have a discussion where both entities can be at the table and get better acquainted with each other and to try to alleviate some of the fears with respect to public safety.
So that would be my hope going forward, is to have a little bit more of a clarity as to what role our city employees who are in the fire department, police department, what they will play in this ongoing community discussions about helping all individuals, especially those who are feeling marginalized, and that's the word that's been used here, feel safe around the individuals who we ask to help us enforce our laws. So that again is just kind of my opinion about the early, genesis of this particular group and how they can be useful and extremely helpful to all the entities that are taking a look at this. Why do people distrust the police? Why are people afraid? Where are these fears coming from? And, what incidents can you point to that would give us a clearer direction as to what this commission would be doing?
Was that a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, was that a question, Councilmember Sandberg?
If someone wants to comment on that, I'm just expressing kind of my concern about, I have not yet heard, a clear enough idea as to how we're going to get past this, people not feeling safe in our community. What specific goals, if we're not going to be inclusive of a representative of the Bloomington Police Department or the city with respect to, or the Board of Public Safety or whoever that might be, to make sure that the police are being represented too in this community discussion on public safety.
Is that something
yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, is that something one of the sponsors would like to address? Go ahead, Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Well, the police hold the power. The police, are funded, are trained, are armed. They hold the power, and we want to hear from people who don't hold power. So I think that power dynamic is the reason why it would prevent us from hearing from people who do not hold the power and who have been marginalized if we had people from the police on this commission. Now, as you know, Ms. Callender Anderson and the mayor's administration are developing a task force on the future of policing. There will be police on that. So there will be input from law enforcement into the city's decisions. And as I said, if the CAPS Commission, after they gather their data and the research about how the most vulnerable in our community feel about public safety, if they then come up with recommendations that involve the police, then there will be conversations. But to have the police at that table initially, that defeats the purpose of getting the input that we need.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenberg.
Thank you. I think the point that there are people that cannot think of one reason why other people in this community would not feel safe is a very clear reason as to why we need this commission. Thank you.
Did you have anything, Councilmember Scambolari? No. Okay, I'll take another bite. One of the things that I'm not, and I want to thank you all that you did take a lot of work to go through all this work and some of the meetings. And I want to thank you for acknowledging on how this was rolled out in the first place and what I kind of think was not as inclusive with community members as it could have been. So thanks for acknowledging that, Councilmember Piedmont-Smith. But I'm not real comfortable with the CAPS becoming a commission so immediately. And it'll function well if it is. But I guess my question is can all of these elements and all these goals that have been proposed as part of this commission, can those same things be accomplished if it was a focus group, at least initially?
Could I ask
Councilmember Flaherty?
Thank you. Just a clarification, do you mean a focus group housed under something or a focus group created by the city council? Or could you clarify if that's...
Unless I'm incorrect, a focus group created by City Council is basically what this commission, CAPS commission, will be. And that's just my viewpoint, but I'm thinking the main focus here with me is it being a commission that is sponsored and part of the City Council immediately. So I'm wondering, is there anything this commission can do, or you expect it to do, that a focus group can't do initially, and then it can be measured and evaluated, and then possibly become a commission later on, if that was my uncomfortability. So how would you address that?
I'll start. I don't know if others are welcome to weigh in too. You sort of mean, and just another clarifying question, or maybe there's some back and forth. You're sort of concerned about this creating a structure that may go in perpetuity in some respect, that may outlive its purpose, or is that right? Like, you'd prefer like a sunset, a sort of built-in sunset time of some sort?
I'm just asking a question. My preference would be that it would be able to operate in a manner so that it is evaluated and measured for success, as was brought up earlier. And the goals can either be met or not met, and it can be massaged, and then you have a much better idea of what form and what its intent is. It will be before it becomes a commission, which in fact, and I'm glad you brought that up, likely would go into perpetuity.
I think for my personal, I think that's a legitimate concern, and I think that's a concern with all of our commissions. Frankly, I think they're all right for review, and I think we should have built-in mechanisms for review with all city commissions, so that we don't so that we're not always growing them. I know this is on the administration's mind as well, and this has been something that has been talked about kind of over time. So I think there's a broader structural issue here that this commission would not be an exception to. I think it would be subject to the same types of things. I take the point that certainly, and you, Councilmember Sims, and others have on the committee have made, that the mission, or exactly what the commission would do, would probably evolve a little bit over time, based on what recommendations they make, what is implemented or not, how they are able to evaluate that. I do think that not to speak for all the sponsors, but I do think we envision something of a multi-year effort that's needed at minimum to be able to track some things over time and evaluate programs or recommendations or things that were implemented based on the commission's recommendations. So to the extent that that could be accomplished by a task force or a focus group, I'm not entirely opposed to it or something. I think on balance, I would favor a commission that is just subject to periodic review, which I would like to apply to all commissions. And that's kind of where I am on that. But I certainly, I think you have valid questions, and I think reasonable minds could differ on exactly the right balance to strike there.
Thank you. I think reasonable minds are differing just a little bit. That's why we're discussing things. Councilmember, okay, I see no hands raised. Councilmember Rosenbarger, you have a follow-up? You're muted.
I could weigh in on that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm muted, unmuted.
That's okay.
I could weigh in on that too still. I mean, I think I would ask you too, I guess, what responsibilities would you imagine a focus group having? Because in my old line of work, evaluation research, it's, like you've got somebody in charge of this focus group who leads the discussion, leads the fact finding, the data gathering, and then sort of like puts a report together in terms of like, here's what I found, And I think that takes a lot of power away from the people that we want to engage and involve. So, I mean, for me, it really comes back to what's the best mechanism we have to empower and give leadership opportunities to the folks we really need and want to hear from. So I don't see, for me, a focus group being that. It feels very much like a one and done situation. And I think there's something about a commission where you're going to be working with the same people over time. I mean, I think this is a space where we need a lot of trust building. And I think a focus group, they're so short, you don't really get that time to get to know the people you're working with. And so you might not say anything that's awkward or uncomfortable or makes you, puts you in a vulnerable position. So I think that creating that safe space is something that's important about a group that's working together over time. I think there's also a level of buy-in and commitment. If we're giving this responsibility to folks that we say, like, we'd like to hear from you, you take the lead on this, you run with like whatever areas you want to pursue. If it is something like Cahoots, like go for it, like let us know what you find. If it is something different, right, like go for it. And so I think it's the leadership opportunities for me and the hearing directly from the folks we want to engage.
Okay, thank you. So being a commission gives this proposed group more continuity, more power. Is that the difference between it and a focus group? And that's not taking away the opportunity being a commission later as part of this discussion. But I guess I'm wondering, what can a commission do that a focus group can't do initially, was my question. Is your hand up, Councilmember P. Mossman? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what a focus group is like in the context of city government. I'm not familiar with, with
well, I understand
does
that.
It exist? I mean,
I understand it. Well, probably not, but that's lies where some of my uncomfortability is, it being attached to city council, and we don't really know what form it is at this point. Don't make it a bad thing. We're just having a community discussion. So.
Well, the form is spelled out in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes, in my experience, a focus group is an advisory group. It is, you're seeking opinion. It's a good way to do it. And it does require someone who's a facilitator who understands how to run an effective focus group. And you can have more than one. You can have several involving different groups. Now, if that's not going to cut the goals that you have in mind, then a task force might be another middle ground between a commission and a focus group, largely doing the same things that you're proposing here. But then I also have heard the word independent, and a task force could certainly be independent of even the council, an outside advisory body that could then advise any number of groups, us, the Board of Public Safety, the Stride Coalition, and all these other task forces that are underway as well. And it could just keep it completely away from any kind of council for anyone with the motivation to want to do this, to reach out to underserved and marginalized populations. To do that, I would welcome that in any form that it comes. And so that's just maybe a middle ground that I would like to see discussed.
May I respond to that?
Yes, you may, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. So the, and now I've lost my train of thought. Gosh darn it. So a task force could be independent. Oh, yes, I remember what I was going to say. I'm so sorry. So if a task force is formed and it's independent, then what responsibility do we in the city council have to listen to it? I mean, my motivation for making this a commission appointed by the city council is that it shows buy-in by the city council that we're appointing these people. We are committing to listening to what they have to say and to taking seriously the outcome of their work. If it's an independent body, there's no obligation on our part to really listen. I mean, there might be, political pressure to listen. And the other thing is also the staffing. And Stephen Lucas in the city council office has very graciously agreed to have staffing available to help the commission, with scheduling and taking notes and stuff like that. Some other entity or some other person would have to volunteer to do that. So I think facilitating it as a commission is beneficial, both just structurally with note-taking and scheduling and all that, as well as it commits us to listening to them, and it gives them credibility. that an independent task force would not have. I also want to reiterate what I've said previously in that I think this is an ongoing task that, we'll come back for evaluation and seeing how we're doing and, maybe doing more in that direction or less. So a task force to me seems like a limited time, and this is not that limited.
Okay, would you suggest that the task force on the future of policing won't be taken seriously by council members because it's not a commission?
No, because it's still part of city government, right? It's called together by Beverly Calendar Anderson's group that have been meeting for several months, and it's definitely got the buy-in of the mayor's office. So,
and if we called for a focus group as opposed to a commission, would that not be the same buy-in?
Councilmember Sandberg mentioned an independent task force, so I was responding to that.
Okay, I just framed it a little differently because I think it's one and the same for sake of discussion. Councilmember Scamble, I'm sorry, were you done? Councilmember Piedmont-Smith? Yeah, Councilmember Scambolari.
And actually, I was going to comment, but I also know we haven't had a chance for public comment yet, and I'd rather defer.
Well,
to
we're
that,
going
so
through questions. Okay, that sounds good. Do we have any, Councilmember Sandberg?
And I would just respond to the whole issue of power and empowerment. When we set up our commissions, those are citizen advisory bodies. They advise elected officials, whether it's the mayor, whether it's us on the city council. And so we certainly take citizen resident feedback seriously in whatever form it comes, whether it comes from individual constituent meetings, whether it comes from individuals who approach us one-to-one, or whether it comes from our wonderful commissions. We listen to them. Now, we make the decisions, however. The decisions rest with the bodies that, by legislative law, have the opportunity to either decide this is a good idea or this is not a good idea. We welcome input and feedback in whatever form it comes. I'm not saying that any of us would disregard the opinions of this particular body, especially as I think we've all recognized it's needed and it's important.
Okay, thank you. Anyone care to respond? Okay, thank you. Seeing no more questions at this time, Mr. Lucas, can we go to public comment, please? I will remind the public again to use the raise hand function in Zoom or send us a message in chat for public comments. We're not going to address time, are we? No, let's just go for public comment.
First up, Maquiba Reese, I believe, is indicating she'd like to comment again, and she should be able to unmute herself now.
Thank you. I think I'm speaking at the right time. I'm just having a hard time here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I also wanted to say, again, my expression of wanting to create something like this, I think it's important. And I'm sure people already know where I'm going to go as I relate to the foundation of this commission. And so my first thought is that I think that this is very white-centered, and it has a lot of privilege as it relates to creating a space, or what people like to say as far as a seat at the table, versus actually allowing people to create their own space and you all join it. And so I know Isabel mentioned an apology. I hear that apology. But my issue with that is that although this has been shared, it still hasn't been worked out as it relates to including voices as far as pausing. So I hear that you hear me, but your actions speak louder than words. And I also wanted to mention that there are a ton of commissions that are already created to support people of underrepresented voices. However, those commissions weren't having a seat at the table or creating this various commission as we speak. And I'm just curious if those individuals were reached out to. And one thing that I mentioned last week was this idea of having an afterthought, creating something, and then an afterthought reaching out to various voices. And I've heard people say that they feel like this is a savior, white savior mentality, or this for this particular commission. And the last thing that I wanted to just share is that it's important for us in Bloomington to recognize how do we create spaces for people and include them and not have a savior mentality. Because I don't want to, personally, I don't want to feel like I need some type of saving. I want to make sure that I'm feeling like I'm being heard. And I hear people say, well, I've been having conversations for the last 4 to 6 months. Personally, I've been having conversations my whole entire life. And so just because this is a newly popular type of discussion, these discussions have been going on for years. And I wanted to make sure that we recognize that. Thank you so much for allowing me to have multiple times to speak tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. Mr. Lucas.
Next up, we have RM, who should be unmuted and ready to comment.
Hi, RM. Can you give us your name, please?
Hi, Renee Meller. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I appreciate the time that you are putting into this. I do want to say thank you, Ms. Reese. I appreciate your comment, because I've been working on this all my life too. I fit into 3 or 4 of the categories in this ordinance. While I am white, I still fit into 3 or 4 of those categories, and also was not asked any opinions. But how would anyone know that I fit into those categories? They don't until, I tell you, and I'm telling you tonight. Having said that, thank you, council persons, Piedmont Smith, Rosenbarger, and Flaherty for bringing up this ordinance. I think it's a good starting place. I think we need to have our voices as part of the planning of such an ordinance. So maybe it can be tweaked a little bit and then passed. That's my opinion. So having said that, an ordinance does give more of a seat at the table. I agree. And I think it was, and I may be wrong, I think it was Councilperson Rosenbarger said then it wouldn't have to go through another body if it were a commission. It would just come to you, the council, which I could appreciate that. I also want to address Councilperson Sandberg's comment about the police and all of that. That is, and bringing that together, I think that is something that happens far down the line, not at the beginning. It all comes together later, after ideas are brought about, and so there's that. I'm a little disjointed here because I had all these notes and all my little notes got messed up. So anyway, let me put them together real quick, see if I can find them. Okay. I do want to start with Don Cohis, an Indigenous alcoholic and addiction specialist, says it best. If you want to care for something, you call it a flower. If you want to kill it, you call it a weed. And I can tell you, as a lesbian who's been homeless, has been an addict, I have often felt like a weed and not been feeling like a flower. And I would like to feel like a flower, and other people in this community would like to be treated as flowers and not like weeds. And to have a seat at the table Ms. Reese should have a seat at the table. I should have a seat at the table. Y'all have seats at the table, with the exception of Councilperson Sims. Y'all are white, every last one of you. I'm white too, but do you fit into any of these other categories? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, these are uncomfortable conversations that a commission could have, and then talk to you and tell you how we're wanting to engage with the community more and to be heard. And we've been trying for years and not been heard. So, I think it's a little disingenuous to say that we have all these groups when we haven't been heard all this time. So I think this is a step in the right direction if, and only if, we can have us as part of the planning of this. And then.
You have about 45 seconds, Ms. Miller.
Oh, come on. I thought we weren't doing time, Councilperson.
No, we never said that. We never decided. You have about 45 seconds.
All right. Well, give me my 10 seconds back from that. I just want to wrap up by saying, again, I appreciate your time this evening. I would like to have the same consideration that you give to all of the white folk in this town that aren't marginalized in those other categories, and let us all blossom as flowers and not as weeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. And she raised a good point, and I do apologize for the confusion, but we're trying to limit public comment to 5 minutes. I didn't see a need to make it shorter since looking at the number of participants. So who do we have next, Mr. Lucas?
Next up, and I'm not sure if she'd actually like to come in or if her hand is just raised, but Beverly Calendar Anderson may have a comment.
Yes, my hand is up for real this time.
Go ahead, Ms. Calendar Anderson. You have about 5 minutes if you need it.
Thank you. I just wanted to address Councilmember Piedmont Smith's comment about the future of policing task force being a city task force. It is being rolled out by the Divided Communities Project. We are formulating it. The Community and Family Resources Department has agreed to lend staff to it so that someone, as you said, with the council office would be doing minutes and those kind of things. But this is totally a community-led, community-directed task force. So it is, and it's community because, as we said earlier, it has the council and the county and IUPD and other entities involved. And so this is a community-wide task group, not necessarily, it's not a city task group. But Ms. Miller actually made me think of something else that I'd like to offer. And I think about when CAPS talks about the voices of marginalized people, and you list a lot of groups like, BIPOC folks and folks who are in addiction and folks who have been incarcerated and that kind of thing. But you can't always look at people and tell what group they belong in. And it's just like she said, she's white. You might not know what group she belongs in. You don't know where people belong by looking at them. And so I don't know how you get the representation necessary that way. And certainly someone like Councilmember Sims or Dean Winbush at IU have some of the same issues with law enforcement and with policing that someone who is actively maybe, using substances or unhoused might have. And so I just think that that's something to consider with this, is that when you talk about people being actively using substances or experiencing homelessness, there are a lot of people out there that you may not see that are having the same kinds of issues, and then they become marginalized. So just wanted to offer that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lucas?
Yes, next up we have Jim Shelton, who should be able to unmute himself.
Good evening. I've enjoyed listening to this. I've learned a lot. You know, I want to follow along behind Beverly Callender Anderson. This needs to be a community effort. You guys say it's broad and you talk about public safety, but as I've listened, all you're really dealing with, what you've talked about is law enforcement. And that's a big part of it, but a whole big part of the public safety picture in our community is in the county. I've heard no reference to the Board of Judges. I've heard no reference to the prosecutor's office or function, no reference to the probation department, no reference to the public defender, no reference to community corrections, for goodness sakes. And then one of the least able groups to be represented is children. You really need to be also involved in the Indiana Department of Child Services and probably the CASA program. So I don't know if you're going to end up wanting to do this or not, but if you're not going to deal with all those things, then you probably ought to call it the Law Enforcement Improvement Commission, which I'm not saying doesn't need to be done, but you really need to be dealing with the parts of public safety that are in the county and at the state level for DCS. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Mr. Lucas?
I don't see anyone else. Just as a reminder, though, if there are any other folks who want to comment, you can do so by raising your hand, by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, or sending a message via chat. We do have a new taker. Jerry Hayes should be able to unmute.
Thank you. I was using the wrong icon apparently to try to raise my hand.
Can you state your name? Can you state your name? Can you state your full name, sir, please?
Jerry Hayes.
Thank you.
And first of all, let me say, I think creating a group to study this issue is extremely important, and I'm really glad that it's being discussed. I think I'd like to start by sort of going back to Ms. Callender Anderson's initial comments about how a commission might create some confusion in the community about accountability and authority and so forth. And I think it also could create some confusion with law enforcement. You know, who are they really to answer to, and who are they to listen to? I think creating a commission, in my view as a citizen, that creates another level of bureaucracy, and to me, bureaucracy is not always very efficient. And I think maybe a task force might be a more efficient way to do that, and also might be less formal and create some opportunities for people to speak more freely, possibly, than to a commission. And finally, I guess, I think creating separate entities sometimes, to me, just creates division. I think a way to solve conflicts is to bring everyone to the table and really just have open, honest conversations. And I think council member Sandberg suggested about having police there. I understand the angst that might create for some, but I think if they had at least one representative in this group, they could hear firsthand what comments are being made and also present their point of view as well. I think 3 times I heard the word power used. And I think that whatever group you come up with, whether it's a commission or task force, there shouldn't be any power there. It should be a group of individuals talking and having frank conversations. And you know, regardless of who's present, there should be no power. No one should have any more power over anyone else. So I think that concludes my comments. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Lucas, I think I saw 2 more at present.
I don't see anyone else that hasn't already commented.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if the chair wants to entertain a second round of public comment.
No, I think everyone gets a bite at the apple, and we've given 5 minutes. So I think, do we have any other commenters that hasn't spoken yet?
Not that I see, and I will say, if there are comments that folks would like to share with the committee or the full council, they're always welcome to email the council office or any of the council members individually and send those comments that way.
Thank you, and particularly those that have already had a chance to speak and have more that they'd like to share with us. So having no further comment, public comment, I'd like to come back to our council for final comments or any questions they might have. I'm sorry, committee members. Councilmember Scambolari.
Thank you. And I'm actually unmuted too, good. I'm gonna pass on this tonight, and here's why. First of all, I'm still trying to understand how all of these different groups who are working on different things from slightly different angles are going to work together in a coordinated way. I'm still not clear on that, and I hope to hear more about that. And also, I am still clinging tenaciously to the idea that we can somehow look more broadly than the city of Bloomington and understand the interconnected nature of the county and the city, and I don't think we've quite done that yet. Beyond that, just a couple things I feel the need to say. There are a handful of commissions that actually have significant power by virtue of their financial authority or their decision-making authority. The Redevelopment Commission is one. The Board of Public Safety is another. I think we will be at our best as a community when a diverse range of voices are included in those boards. And I think that is something we have to consistently keep working toward. This group, as it's proposed, is advisory. And I promise you, I will listen to these voices no matter what we call a group. I think if we call it a task force or a working group or a committee or a commission, I want to hear these voices and I will listen no matter what we call this group. And so, again, I still have questions about how this would all work. I still think our broader goal should be to ensure that diverse voices are included in every decision-making board we have. And we cannot lose sight of that. And with that, I'll be passing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further final comments? Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. I too will be passing this evening. I think the speed in which this was brought up deserves a little bit more reflection and a little bit more understanding. One of the things that I kept thinking about as I saw that this was going to come forward rather quickly is that those of us that went through the entire UDO process last year, one of the very strong recommendations that came out of that was that we form an affordable housing commission. And the wheels have not yet started to turn on that. And I definitely see that being a function that could certainly be beneficial, having a wide variety of community members serving on a commission such as that. My point being, these things do take time in thinking through them. Who's going to staff them? Is this just a duplication of other efforts that we have underway? And they're all very important considerations. And of course, a lot of things hit between the UDO and preparing for the budget rounds. And, you know, things just don't move on a dime as we would perhaps like them to on the city council. We have a lot of things spinning up in the air that we have to keep our focus on. So while this is important, I would like a little more time to think it through and talk to some individuals. Many of you have brought up some points that I will follow up on with respect to other individuals in the community who may certainly be good advocates for the kind of goals that we've talked about here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pima Smith, do you have any final comments?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to reply to a few things mentioned by members of the public. First of all, I want to be clear that we three council members who co-sponsored the legislation will not serve on the commission. We are not going to be on the commission. Just wanted to make that clear. Secondly, there was a good question about, we may not know if applicants for the commission fall into one of the categories that we would like to encourage participation from. And certainly that's a very good point. Usually I think on the general application form, it says, why are you interested in this commission and things like that. So we might want to put some more pointed questions on there about, why do you feel like your voice hasn't been heard or something like that. I don't want to, I shouldn't throw something out just off the top of my head, but I think that we could think of some carefully worded questions to kind of understand where the person's coming from and that is a voice that we normally wouldn't hear. The comment from, I think it was from Mr. Shelton, that we shouldn't just be looking at law enforcement, but we should be looking at the Board of Judges and the local criminal justice system. Those are all part of county government. They are, of course, part of the greater sense of law and order that we have in our society. But again, this commission isn't trying to solve everybody's problems. It's trying to hear from voices about public safety, which isn't only law enforcement, which is like, how can we help more people feel safe? Living, working, sleeping, eating, being in the city of Bloomington. And so this is a mechanism, this commission would be a mechanism to hear from people we don't normally hear from as to their ideas for making people feel safer. So it's not trying to solve all of our criminal justice issues. That's not even the domain of city government that we can influence. And specifically in the ordinance, it does say that the commission would look into solutions that involve social service agency, community centers, job training, things like that. So there are some examples listed there of things that are not law enforcement that may be investigated as a way to help improve public safety. As to the Divided Communities Project, I just did want to mention that I don't know if other council members were included in the discussions that have been held for the last year or so with the Divided Communities Project, but I have not. And I don't think my two colleagues who are co-sponsors of this legislation have been involved in those discussions either. So I think it's wonderful that it's a community initiative and that there be outreach to the county and several different facets of our community. That's wonderful. But I, as a city council member, don't feel like I've been invited to be involved with that. So I just wanted to say that. So just in summary, I do think that this commission would offer a valuable tool for us as policymakers, as individuals who represent our community, as people who vote on the budget, because it would bring forward those voices that are most affected by our decisions, but that have the least power currently. And that's really my main goal, is I want to hear from people about public safety and how we can improve it. And I think it is an urgent issue. I think we have people, I mean, I've talked to several people who have had very frightening, negative interactions with our local law enforcement. And this is not, this is just widening that divide. So I think in order to bring us together eventually, we need to act quickly before that divide gets to a point where there's no return of coming together. And people are suffering. People are being discriminated against. People are being targeted, not necessarily by law enforcement, but in ways that make them feel unsafe by various other people in the community. And this is, people have been experiencing this for decades. And, at what point do we say it's urgent? I think it's urgent. I think it was urgent yesterday. I think it was urgent 10 years ago. We need to move forward. We need to show the community that we are listening, that we know there are problems, and we're going to do something about it. And to do something about it, we first have to hear from people who don't have a seat at the table. And I think that's what this commission does.
Thank you very much. I'll finish up this evening. We've heard a lot about the CAPS Commission and other commissions, and a lot about our community this evening. A couple weeks ago at a council meeting, I shared an incident that happened with me at a business. That business is located in the county. I think or has a county address. Now, I think the point of that is that we talk a lot about Bloomington. We talk about certain things, but Bloomington is not in a vacuum. Bloomington is in part of Monroe County. We talk a lot about BPD at last count, and particularly if you include the IU Health police or law enforcement at IU Health. At last count, we're looking at 6 or 7 different police agencies that our community members may have to come into interaction with and contact with. So a couple things. I agree with you. I totally agree with the goals and the intent of this CAPS Commission. I also agree that there is some urgency to this. Where I'm starting to have a slight disagreement is that it has to be a commission in order for us to listen to our own citizens, as opposed to a task force or a focus group. One of our public commenters, Mr. Shelton, I thought brought up a very good point as far as being inclusive and having fundamental change that could lead to policy changes and potentially, I'm looking forward to even some systemic changes. But that will not happen, in particular if we're talking about marginalized groups. And I'll just say this, I happen to be a member of one of them. Okay, Bloomington Police, if in fact I was uncomfortable with that, and I think I speak for many in my community, my relationship, if I had an issue with Bloomington Police Department, that's just part of it. Because then if I am not routed to, say, Stride Center or to emergency department, and let's say I'm arrested, well, now I'm dealing with the prosecutor's office. And after that, now I'm dealing with the board of judges. So we're talking about arrest. We're talking about charging. We're talking about sentencing. And then after that, we're talking about probation people potentially if you don't go to a higher level of incarceration. So I think it makes sense for the Divided Communities Task Force that is much more inclusive to effectively have more change. Now, there are some issues I have with that group as well, mostly with timing and some other things. But I am most happy with how more inclusive it feels to me in the way I think it is. That is not to be read in any manner that the CAPS Commission proposal is not important. It does not have substance, and it should be part of the conversation. So I don't want anyone to say, Jim, don't, whatever. I think everyone should be included. I have been in situations where I think it's possible, and we have to work at it, that you create safe spaces so that the people that don't feel safe can be made to feel safe as best we can. And I don't think just forming a commission does that. It can help based on the membership, I think. But I just think there's a broader way to do that. And so I'm still looking forward to sharing more discussion next week with the full council, if at all possible. Now, having said that, do we have any more questions? And if Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Oh, I was just going to make a suggestion, a point of order, as it were, that I believe that at this point, we need a motion to either
I was about to call for a due pass recommendation, yes.
Or the other option would be to move that we have a second hearing on this in 2 weeks, in this committee.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready to consider a due pass recommendation? You're muted.
I'm unmuting.
Okay.
With the sponsors, I would actually direct this question to the sponsors. Would it be helpful to you to have another week to talk more about this, or would you prefer a vote tonight?
I would think that
I mean, it sounds
that question is more important for you all who have to vote on it. I mean, are you ready to vote now, or are you, I mean, two of you said you would pass, so I would think that having another 2 weeks to think about it and talk about it would help you to make up your mind, maybe?
And if I would. No, go ahead. I was just going to say, pass isn't actually a vote and not an indication of an extension, at least the way I view it. So
Mr. Chair,
I will repeat, are we ready to consider a due pass recommendation?
Mr. Chair, I would like to move as an alternative that we hold another meeting on Thursday, November 12th of this committee to continue our discussion of this proposal.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second to have a second committee meeting on November 12th, Thursday. We'll get the scheduled time at a later date, later, but the date is the 12th on a Thursday for a second Public Safety Committee meeting. Okay, it's been properly, yes, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Why would it be Thursday and not Wednesday? Isn't that?
This is the council schedule that has an opening in case we extended it. Mr. Lucas, can you expound on that?
I believe the Wednesday of that week is Veterans Day, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, is that an official holiday? Okay, thank you for clarifying. So we are allowed to have a committee meeting on a Thursday in that case?
Yes, that's been part of the annual schedule that's been approved since the end of last year. And
yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been properly moved in second to hold a second Public Safety Committee meeting on November the 12th, which is a Thursday. Calling the roll, Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. All right, thank everyone. Thank the public for attending. If we don't hear from any of you before then, we'll talk to you again on November the 12th. Thank you very much. And again, thanks for the sponsors and the writers of this piece of legislation. Looking forward to more discussion. Thank you all and have a great night.